Product market fit is not necessarily enough, and sometimes like you need the right fit between the product and the market and that channel that you're going to deliver the product through. We've almost had to refactor our product market fit a few different times in that journey as we expand the types of conditions that we serve. Every time that we've had to part ways with someone, we've kind of been kicking ourselves for not doing it sooner. I think the hardest moment for me was at my previous company, Prism Labs, where we had to eventually shut it down.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host for the Founder10x podcast. And today we have Adam Breckler with us. Adam is a co-founder and head of product at Better Health. Adam is a seasoned entrepreneur and product expert. At Better Health, he leads efforts to simplify access to medical equipment and support for people with chronic conditions, combining technology, peer coaching, and education to improve patient outcomes. In this episode, we talk about early idea validation, go-to-market strategy, product market fit, fundraising and hiring approach, taking care of mental health as a founder, and lots more. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Founder10x, where I help venture capitalists, asset managers, allocators, and family offices in starting their own podcast and building a strong brand. Founder10x is designed in a way to work well with the busy schedule of investors, where we handle every aspect of podcast production so you can focus on investing. If you're looking to build a strong investor brand, starting a podcast should be right up your priority list. It's the only form of marketing where you can showcase your strong network, in other words, access to limited partners and founders, and grow that network further. And contrary to what most people hear, it's still very early to start a podcast. There are at least 10x more newsletters and 1000x more blogs than there are podcasts in this world. You can learn more about our podcasting services at podcast10x.com. I'll make sure to add the link in the description below. Enjoy this episode. Hey Adam, so good to have you on the VC10x podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, Prashant. Great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you on. To start things off, can we first have a brief background about yourself and your journey as a founder that led you to now being the co-founder of Better Health?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I think going back to the early days, I like to joke I started my career as a professional poker player, but that only lasted about 6 months. But that gave me a bit of a risk-loving appetite, and turned me on to the whole world of making money online. So from there, built a couple websites, cut my chops as a web developer, and then joined up with an early stage team at mint.com as a web developer there, and sort of got a taste for the Silicon Valley startup scene at that point. We left Mint after acquisition and then started a company called Visually, which was in the online information graphics design space with some of my colleagues from Mint. And then we ended up selling that about 4 years into the journey and moving on. Started a YC-backed company after that. This was like my second, I guess, venture-backed company. So started that one as a solo founder, which I don't recommend to most people, but that was an interesting journey. We went through many pivots, ended up ultimately shutting that company down after COVID, but learned a lot of lessons along the way and ultimately ended up starting Better Health around that time.
Absolutely. So you are what the definition of a serial entrepreneur. You're just starting up after starting up. And despite failures, you're just still motivated and want to solve something important, right? And now on to Better Health, right? So tell us about what the idea is and how you got the idea of starting Better Health and how did you validate that idea in the beginning stages?
Yeah, sure. So Better Health was the brainchild of my co-founder, actually, who's our CEO. She's also my wife. Her name is Nama, and she had the idea come to her based on an experience as a medical device manufacturer. So she worked for 7 years on a novel intermittent urinary catheter design, got it manufactured, went through FDA clearance, all that, and tried to get it out to market and found that all the existing distribution channels for novel medical products were gate blockers, essentially, for new innovations, just because of the way the industry was structured. So my role in the kind of early days was convincing her that she had a very unique position and insight into this market, both as a former software engineer and PM from the Israeli military, but also as somebody who had insight into this very specific $80 billion niche market within the healthcare context, and then helped put the story and the deck together, and we raised a $3.5 million seed round, and we were off to the races.
Absolutely, that's quite interesting. Briefly talk about the decision of starting up with your life partner, right? There is a debate around it. Should you do that or should you not do that? The dangers of it, right? What can go wrong? What made you do it?
Yeah, great question. So we get that a lot. People are always curious. I think for us, like it worked because we were both entrepreneurs previously. We both had, that respect for each other. We had both been CEOs previously as well. So we had a mutual respect for the role of CEO. And then on top of that, it was very clear, based on our unique experiences and skill sets, how we could separate out the responsibilities. And the fact that I didn't see myself as a CEO this round made it a lot easier. So we have a very good division of decision making that we make within the company, which I think helps with that. We also had a few role models, of different friends, also entrepreneurs that had done this sort of thing, and they had recommended it to us. And so far, so good.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. Talk about how you thought about the GTM strategy, the go-to-market strategy in the early days, and how that played out, and how you tweaked that as the requirements came in.
Yeah, sure. So when we just started, our go-to-market was primarily through direct-to-consumer channels. So, Google Ads, search, Facebook, trying to reach consumers where they were. These were like the most desperate consumers that were looking for a new, better solution to receive their medical supplies. And so we were able to get some early traction through those channels, as well as, be able to leverage some of the experience that we had each built up previously, building direct to consumer businesses. And so that was our initial go-to-market for better health.
Yeah, quite interesting. And you mentioned how you raised 3.5 million seed round. So was that the very first funding that you take in, or did you have any safe rounds before that at all?
No, that was the first round we raised, and that was off of
Okay,
a slide deck, towards the end of 2019. So
right.
different times, but we had already validated through Nama's prior experience the market and the need. So I feel like it was kind of a shortcut for us to get started. We didn't have to go through some of the typical trials and tribulations and pivots that early stage startups have to go to when they're low on funding. So we were able to kind of hit the gas from day one because we had already validated the market need.
Right. Quite interesting. And how did you think about fundraising? How did you come to that number that, okay, 3.5 million is what we need right now, right? What went into that decision that this is the number we should be raising for the seed round?
Yeah, to be honest, I think part of it was just driven by the market at the time. Part of it was driven by other comparables, other rounds that we had seen raised by different friends and entrepreneurs at the time. Part of it was just wanting to give us enough of a cushion for the seed to have a few different shots at cracking different go-to-market channels. So we felt like that was a good number to give us that sort of flexibility in the early days.
Absolutely. And on fundraising, were you also trying to get on some strategic investors early on? Do you have like a target list or any system or process in place for you to approach fundraising? I know you're experienced founders, so you'd have a more defined and refined approach to how to go about this.
Yeah, so with this round, it came together pretty quickly. We didn't have like we had like basically a short list of investors that we wanted to speak with. One of the investors that ended up leading the round or co-leading was 8VC, and they came through a recommendation from another entrepreneur that we were friends with that they had recently funded as well. And so that was one of the first initial pitch meetings, and they were in to lead from basically the early days. So that made the entire process a lot faster. So at that point, we were more in a position to be able to pick what other investors we wanted to bring around the table once we had secured that lead.
Absolutely. My next question is around hiring, right? Another important aspect of any business, right? So, how did you go about recruiting your first few employees into the company? What were those key roles that you identified that need to be filled? And how did you find the right people to fill those roles?
Yeah. So we had the first few key hires. One of the ones that we made right off the bat was a head of ops, named Danielle. She was with us from the very early days, even pre-product and everything. And as we closed the round, we were able to kind of convince her to join. After that, we brought on a few other engineers to start building the product. One of them was a former entrepreneur, actually, and now current entrepreneur that we were able to recruit on a part-time basis. This is something that I feel like is often a nice hack to be able to work with really highly capable people that maybe you either don't have the funds or don't have the ability to hire full-time to your venture, but you want to be able to work with them. So he was in between companies and he was able to work with us part-time in order to get some of our technology infrastructure off the ground. So just keeping an open mind towards more creative kind of hiring methods, I think paid off in the early days.
Absolutely. And as the company has sort of matured over time, there is a need to bring in some senior folks as well, some folks that are highly competitive in the hiring market. You have to compete for them really hard. How do you go about, recruiting for those roles? What are the kind of perks you try to entice them with, or the other factors that you can entice them to get them to work for you?
Yeah, I think for us, it comes down to the mission, and that's what we're selling to people, and that's the sort of the core belief in the mission is what people are signing up for when they join Better Health. And if the mission resonates with them, we can recruit people that are probably even out of our sort of like pool of talent, just because they really resonate with the mission. So I think that's the biggest advantage that we have, is like we're a mission oriented company, and that helps us a lot in that regard. I think as soon as you're competing with the open AIs or Googles of the world as a startup, you've kind of lost the game, because you can never compete on compensation, right? So that's sort of a losing battle.
Absolutely. And how do you think about hiring as you scale the organization, right? So you raised the first round, 3.5 million. I believe you've also raised subsequent rounds. How do you think about how much of this funding we will allocate to getting talent in, how much of it into marketing, and how much of it to other things, right? How do you do that math?
Yeah. So we've typically, I'd say, like we've hired. We've tried to hire to support growth and not into anticipation of growth in a lot of functions. So, we in the early days had to hire up a lot on the operational side to support some of the growth that we were getting, but weren't yet ready to fully productize, so to speak. And so now, we've kind of shifted that a little bit since then. So as we've taken on more rounds of funding, we've been able to grow the engineering team and grow our technology infrastructure to be able to support more like scaled growth. But in the early days, you're kind of Wizard of Ozing it a little bit. So we're definitely doing that, and I think we've kind of transitioned off of having to do that as much recently. But in terms of allocating resources towards hiring, we like to use, I think it's the Keith Raboy analogy is very apt here, of like barrels and ammunition. So like hiring like one barrel that you can kind of give a really large set of responsibility to, and then they hire ammunition on their team to kind of shoot them in the right direction. So that's the sort of hiring philosophy that we have, and just differentiating between those two, because they're oftentimes very different profiles of people.
Absolutely. And with hiring, another thing that sort of comes in is culture, right? And somewhat early stage startup culture is by definition somewhat different from a startup that is more mature, maybe Series A, Series B, right? So how do you navigate the culture? As the founder, do you try to dictate how to shape the culture of the organization? Or do you like to first observe and see how the organization behaves and then just make tweaks to it to put it in the right direction?
Yeah, I think I mean, my own philosophy on this is like culture. Yeah, it should come from the founders, and like if you're letting it sort of come from the too much from the bottoms up and be like emergent, it's not going to really solidify. It's going to be hard to kind of gel. So we've always taken the approach of, we're going to try to set the culture, talk very explicitly about, who's a good fit for this culture and who's not, and we do that in the hiring process. And the way we describe the culture to candidates that we're interviewing is that it's a blend between Israeli military culture in terms of being very direct, but it's also has the flip side of it in terms of like the niceties of American corporate culture, where people are also nice. So it's sort of a balance between the two, and that's the way we describe our culture. And I think that resonates for a lot of candidates.
Absolutely. Have you faced any candidate who was a really promising candidate but wasn't particularly aligning with your culture? What call did you make then? Did you still choose to hire them, or did you let them go for that?
Well, I think in those cases that we've come across, because we're so explicit about what our culture is like up front and transparent about it, people will opt out. So they'll sometimes it doesn't happen often, but they'll tell us like that sounds great for you guys, but like that's the type of culture that resonates with me. So we haven't had. I mean, there's been some cases where we've had to part with people later that we have hired because they're not necessarily a cultural fit, and you find that out later. But for the most part, we try to screen that out in the early conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so let's talk about the stage after you've hired folks, right? How do you think about onboarding and then training and tracking their performance, and then eventually firing them if they are not performing, right? That after hired process.
Right. Yeah. So I think we definitely prescribe to the hire slow, fire fast sort of methodology. I think every time that we've had to part ways with someone, we've kind of been kicking ourselves for not doing it sooner. And you always know it too, right? Where and sometimes people will just leave voluntarily when you're starting to apply more pressure and trying to really boost their performance if they're underperforming. So we've had cases like that as well. But I think the meta learning there for me is always just through multiple companies is like you always know, and you just got to trust your gut feeling that things aren't working out and be decisive. And it's best for the people that are involved on the other end as well if you're upfront about that sooner than later, because then they can move on to their next thing and figure out a better role somewhere else where they're a fit.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's insightful. And talking about PMF, right? The phenomena that the startup world loves, right? What does that look like for you? So to talk about the two phases of it initially, when maybe you were figuring out what is PMF for us, right? And the trials and tribulations of that. And then once maybe you reach that or approaching that, what did that feel like?
Yeah, so I think for us, because we serve different populations of patients with our company for different conditions, we've almost had to refactor our product market fit a few different times in that journey as we expand the types of conditions that we serve. So, the first example of product market fit that we felt, I'll share with you, was with this population of folks that have ostomies. They call themselves ostomates, so they need these medical supplies, every day, and so. And there's a lot of issues they come across in terms of leakages and irritation, skin irritations, and things like that. So we put out a few ads on Facebook, and we saw in the comments section that people were turning it into like a mini social network and asking for help and tips and tricks from the community on Facebook, like within the Facebook ad. And that's the moment where we saw, there was a really strong pull from the market, and that we developed a whole peer support program to support those people as part of our core product offering that unlocked a whole new type of product market fit for that category that we hadn't had before.
Right, absolutely. And what does product market fit when you have achieved it feels like? Is it like numbers are flowing in automatically? Your metrics are going up and to the right? What does that feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like what is the expression? It's like it when you see it, right? So you
Hmm.
can see it in the numbers, you feel it viscerally in the response that patients or your customers are giving to you. I think for us, one of the nuanced ways that we experience product market fit was trying to build through different channels. And so oftentimes, what we found is we need to establish product market channel fit. Product market fit is not necessarily enough. And sometimes like you need the right fit between the product and the market and that channel that you're going to deliver the product through. So we've had to, like I said before, rediscover product market fit through each channel and each condition that we've decided to expand our product offering into.
All right. So do you mean to say that there can be multiple channels and that product market channel fit will look different for different channels? Or are you saying that you also need to find that singular channel that works best for you and try to double down on that?
I think ideally you find one or two that are like really strong and double down, but sometimes, you need more. So when we made a transition from our direct to consumer channel to our partnership channel, that was a really pivotal moment where we had to rediscover that product market channel fit. The product was essentially the same. The end patients were the same patients, but we had to rediscover how to unlock that channel with some changes that we had to make to the product to accommodate that. And that was, that was a big learning, especially within the healthcare world, going from direct to consumer world where you're just dealing with patients and then sometimes with payers, now having to layer in providers, health systems, it complicates things quite a bit. So you need to figure out very quickly how to navigate that and, distribute your product through that channel.
Absolutely. And how do you think about building moats within the company to make it a defensible business against competitors?
Yeah, I mean, for us, moats start with the network effects that we can create. So, we're sort of a marketplace of sorts where we have the payers, providers, patients, and then we're layering in manufacturers to the mix too. So we the more connections that we can make across all those different parties and be that central hub for connecting them, the more network effects that we can create and the more stickiness there. I think another aspect are like regulatory or hurdles. So there's a trivial amount of regulation you need to comply with as a healthcare company and as a covered entity. And so, getting insurance licenses, putting in place all the safeguards around HIPAA compliance, all these things are also moats that wouldn't allow a competitor to come in and start off from day one.
Absolutely. What are the key metrics that you obsess over at Better Health?
We have two primary ones. One is NPS, and so we're proud to about our NPS score. It's been steadily climbing into the 80s now. So it's 86 currently. It was in the 60s, which was very high at the time over the past year, and we're very proud of the fact that we've gotten that up very high. Patients definitely love the product. We also measure retention very closely. So all of the different retention cohorts over time. If you think about retention in our business, a lot of the patients that we serve have chronic conditions and they need these supplies for the rest of their lives. So the retention should be very high in theory. So when a patient, leaves us for whatever reason, typically the number one reason actually is that they no longer need the products or they've passed away. And so that's what we call our non-regrettable churn rather. And then regrettable churn is when we do something wrong, and that happens sometimes too, and we lose a patient for some reason that's on us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's quite interesting how you think about that. And so, as a founder, you always have some really vulnerable moments, right? Your weak moments, you can say, your difficult moments as a founder, right? Can you recount on some of those moments and how you tackled and went through that?
Yeah, I think I think the hardest moment for me was at my previous company, Prism Labs, where we had to eventually shut it down. We had been through many pivots, survived a crypto winter, and then ultimately lost our runway towards the end of or the beginning of COVID, and then that was a really tough moment because we had kind of survived through multiple pivots and gotten some decent traction along the way, and shutting down the company was really tough.
Absolutely. That's probably the worst that can happen to a founder, right? So what were the consequences to that? How did that make you feel, and how did you overcome those feelings or dealt with those feelings?
Yeah, I think it's really, I think the hardest part was before deciding to do it, and then after that you kind of realize, okay, I made the right decision. Was speaking with some of my investors at Prism, Imad from Mercury. Actually, he was an angel investor, and he gave some really good advice that, like, you shouldn't keep going on fumes if you're doing it just for your investors. Like, he said, your time is the most precious asset here. So you should figure out how to go on and start a new venture. If that's the best path for you, like, don't worry if you lose my money. And so that was really cool of him to say, and sort of like opened me up to the possibility of us, shutting it down, but moving on and doing something else.
Absolutely. And now that again you're a founder of a venture-backed, fast growth startup, it again it takes an emotional toll, and it's sometimes too much to take. So how do you take care of your personal mental health while you're into it, and the different practices, if at all, that you take up to find some sanity in the chaos that you're operating in?
Yeah. So that's a challenge. Nama and I have 3 young children together also. So we have a lot that we share in there. So I'd say the one thing is just staying well fed, like healthy, exercise a lot. So as much as we can, at least. So like to do some strength training and play tennis when we have time, and get sleep when possible.
Absolutely. What I have seen is that when you're really stressed out, you also don't want to exercise, even though you know that's going to make you feel better. Has that happened to you? What
Oh
do you
yeah.
do in that cases?
In that case, I just have my personal trainer show up, and he forces me to exercise. So that's my hack there. Just pay to have some accountability.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Have you also thought about like business coaches? I've heard coaches in the business world, and that can be really helpful when you're going
Yeah,
through tough times. Have
definitely.
you
Yeah,
thought
we
about
have
that?
we've used a coach for about most of the journey of Better Health, actually, going back to even right after we raised our seed round about 4.5 years. So that's definitely helpful. And we've used it across our leadership team as we've scaled the same coach.
That's quite interesting. So is the coach exclusive to Better Health, or are they also working with other
They
companies? And
work with other teams. Yeah, they're like a fractional, coach. So they have other companies that they work with as well.
got it. That's interesting. I was actually reading the book, The $1 Trillion Coach, where they're describing the practice of Bill Campbell, right? And that's quite interesting. So, can you give me an insight into how that works in practice? Are you having like meetings with them every month, every week? How does that work?
Usually biweekly, and then sometimes they'll come in towards a more like a hands-on strategy session or something with the broader leadership team. So they have it's great because they then have the context from each of your individual coaching sessions, and then they can help work with the group together.
Got it. Quite interesting. And you mentioned you also have kids, right? So how do you manage around that? Because both you and your better half, that's a great name for your wife, better half.
She
So
is the better half. Yes.
yeah, so since both of you are at the very helm of the company, everything, all the responsibility of the company is on your shoulders practically. How do you manage that with having 3 kids, right? I don't know how old they are, but still having kids is a big responsibility. How do you manage that? How do you manage your time? Do you like take turns in, spending time with them, or you have, some help
A lot of
to
help.
get that?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
pay for help.
Okay.
We have grandparents that help quite a bit, and then we have a nanny as well. So that goes a long way. I would say that the other aspect of it, that's unique to our situation. Like I mentioned, we were both CEOs previously, and we both had young kids but separate startups. So to come from that, which was even more of a challenging environment because you have your own companies that you're both dealing with, and you have to be sort of the co-founders, partners of the other spouse. So that was even more challenging than now, where we have a single company that we're both have all our eggs in the same basket and rowing in the same direction. So it definitely simplifies things a bit from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a serial entrepreneur yourself, what mistakes do you think you made in your previous stints as a founder? And also some lessons that you'd like to pass on to other first time founders that you think they should avoid making?
Yeah, I think one that comes to mind that I've been thinking of recently and find myself discussing quite a bit is around building too much or falling into the building trap. One of my mentors and previous investors, Sean Burns, wrote an article recently that I shared about this concept of, especially for product focused founders, it's very easy to get caught in the trap of trying to build your way out into product market fit, but oftentimes you have a more fundamental misalignment or issue with your business plan. And so, taking a step back, to kind of evaluate that more objectively before going and building an MVP or trying to, add the next feature and the next feature and the next feature in the hope that that's what's going to be unlocking product market fit for you, I think is a trap that I've fallen in, and I see a lot of other founders do as well.
Absolutely. Is there anything else from your previous stage that you think that now you are an evolved founder, so you're doing it this way, but previously in your previous stints you did it some other way?
I think the other thing that comes to mind is, as I mentioned with BetterHelp, we had a very clear idea of the market need and an understanding of it from day one. Whereas with Prism, I think we were more interested in just exploring different spaces and creating products, and that was what the driving force for why we started the company, instead of having a really clear point of view on what was the market and who was the specific user that we wanted to build for up front. And I think that led us in that direction of trying to pivot, but not having like that North Star to build towards. And so I would say that was another lesson that I learned the hard way.
Absolutely. So coming to my last question before we try to close this out, looking back, what was the most pivotal decision you made that changed your company's growth trajectory?
I would say it was making that decision to go down the B2B2C path with BetterHealth. We had, seen solid growth from direct to consumer, gotten early traction and established clinical evidence for our solution. But then making that decision to start partnering with the healthcare systems and the providers and the payers directly was one that we had to build a new muscle for in terms of the go-to-market. But that's really started to pay a lot of dividends now as we scale. So, making that decision to kind of what got us there isn't necessarily going to get us to the next step or that next inflection point. And so, having the courage to be able to make that decision to kind of pivot the go-to-market, I think was a good decision in hindsight. Probably one that we should have done even earlier.
Right. Just to follow up on that, so what was the point where you realized that, okay, this B2C approach isn't working and we should rather take a B2B2C approach?
I think it came around the point where, we would see that we would spend incremental dollars on marketing and it wasn't driving nearly as efficient gains in terms of customer acquisition. So we started seeing that ceiling that you'll often see in B2C world where, you spend more dollars and you're getting less return on your ad spend.
Got it. Makes sense. All right. So now let's close it out. So where can people learn more about what you're doing at Better Health? And where can people learn more about you and follow your journey?
Yeah, so you can check us out on joinbetter.com. And I will tweet from time to time or on X at Adam Breckler.
Awesome. I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes below. Thank you so much for making time for this, Adam, and sharing your valuable insights from your founder journey all through different startups. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Awesome.